Welcome to the fourth part of the series on, I guess, what you would call Yisod Emunah in Hebrew, but I guess what you in English you would call, give me a good translation, somebody who speaks Hebrew, Yisod Emunah, foundations of how do we know that the Torah is from Hashem? I guess, there you go. And tonight's discussion is going to be about how we know that the Exodus from Egypt actually occurred. You know that famous story that we say on Pesach? How do we know it, and how do we know it actually occurred? And if you think about it, really, it's probably what. Well, let's discuss it. The Exodus from Egypt, in Hebrew is called Yitziat Mitzrayim, or in the Ashkenazi dialect, that's Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Exodus from Egypt is when Hashem brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians. Everybody knows 10 plagues, I hope I can say them out. And He took the Jewish people out. And what's interesting is that in the Torah, it's probably mentioned more than anything else. And beyond that, a tremendous amount of actual mitzvot are connected to it as a zeichel yitziat Mitzrayim, as a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. For example, when we say in Kiddush, we mention zeichel yitziat Mitzrayim. When we do tefillin, zeichel yitziat Mitzrayim. I believe taking interest from a Jew also. Don't do it because Hashem said, I took you out from Egypt. And for men, you actually have a mitzvah from the Torah to remember that Hashem took you out from Egypt in the morning and in the evening. And if that weren't enough, the first of the 10 Commandments is, the 10 Commandments, the biggies. The first of the 10 Commandments is when Hashem says, I am Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. It's like, this is like number one, took you out of Egypt. So the question really is, why is there so much emphasis on took you out of Egypt? Like, what's the big deal? Like, I get it. Okay, it was beautiful, it was great, but like the consistent emphasis in the Torah, took you out of Egypt, I took you out of Egypt. And I think the answer is because it's the foundation of everything else in the Torah. What do I mean? It means that's the way, when Hashem took us out of Egypt, He showed us that there is nothing else, and nothing in the world that He does not control. Everything is in His control. If He wants, He'll make it hail, and the hail will have fire inside of it. Ice and water and fire will coexist with no problem. If He wants, you'll have wonderful water, and if He wants, He'll turn to blood. You want to see? No, I'm joking. If He wants, it'll be day. If He wants, it'll be night. There is no nature when it comes to Him. All of nature is in His hands. And it's literally the one time in history that Hashem comes out and says, look, I'm going to reveal to you, there's no such thing as nature, it's just me. There's a famous story of Rabbi Salanter, where this happened approximately 200 years ago, where Rabbi Salanter was the father of the Muslim movement. The Muslim movement is basically the movement where Jews became very much into working on themselves as opposed to just learning Torah, but working internally on themselves. And he comes to a certain hotel in his travels, and he sees like a religious Jewish guy. One day, the guy is like not wearing a kippah, he's not washing his hands before bread, and he's like, what happened? Last time I was here, you were like a more or less religious individual. What happened now? So he said, I had a guest come into my hotel, and he comes in with a Jewish guy, and he's got a pork sandwich, and I tell him, what are you doing? He's like, what's the problem? He's like, you're eating pork. He's like, so what? He's like, what do you mean, Hashem? It's not just the Torah. He's like, there's no such thing. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, watch, Hashem, if you actually exist, I should choke on this, he says. And he takes a bite and says, that was great. And then he dies. No, I'm joking. See that? And he's fine. And nothing happens. And so the hotel owner tells Rabbi Salanter, that really shook up my faith in God. Like, why didn't Hashem just do something about it? He was testing God. Why didn't He show him? And Rabbi Salanter says, okay, I understand, I hear. And he goes to his room. Later that evening he comes out, and he hears the daughter of the hotel keeper come and says, Abba, I just got my not license, but I guess I was just ranked as one of the best pianists in the city. Got the degree, everything is amazing, I can play like the best of them. Father's so happy. And Rabbi Salsanta looks at her and says, I don't believe you. She's like, what? It's like, I don't believe you. It's like, oh, prove it, play something for me. And play me something from Mozart. And she's looking at him, he's like, no. So he looks at the hotel and tell her to play something. What is this? And the hotel owner was like looking at the door, looking at him, doesn't know what to do. And he's like, play something. Rabbi Salsan tells her. He says, no. She's like, why not? I don't believe you that you became one of the best in the city. She's like, I have a official document from the city here that says I'm one of the best. Why do I need to play for you? Anytime somebody's going to walk into this door and is going to say, oh, I don't believe, oh, you play, really? You don't look like you can play. Play something for me. I'm going to play for them every single time? What I need that? Here's the certificate. Take a look at it. Enjoy. So Rishal San says, okay, good. Thank you. I understand. He turns around to the hotel owner. He says, and the same for Hashem. Every time some Joe Schmo is going to come in and say, Hashem, I don't believe in you. Do a miracle for me. Hashem should do a miracle. Every time a guy is going to pick up a pork sandwich and say, Hashem, it doesn't work that way. One time in history, Hashem laid out for us and the entire world that He runs the entire world. That's it. And it's interesting that it's not just by Jews and Judaism that the Exodus from Egypt was so important. It's in Christianity and Islam, they don't start without it. Both Christianity and Islam are both founded on the fact that the Jewish people came out of Egypt and that they got the Torah at Har Sinai, they got the Torah at Mount Sinai. Without that, you can ask any educated Christian or Muslim, did the Jews come out of Egypt? Did God take them out of Egypt? And if they know anything about their religion, they'll have to say, yes, God took them out of Egypt. Because that was the only time that God communicated to an entire nation. And so, and they only say, yeah, He took them out of Egypt, but, that was the foundation, the introduction of God to the world, but He changed His mind. That's their little twist to it. It's funny because the Christians say that God changed His mind and chose them, except the Jews, and the Muslims come and say, yeah, He changed His mind again, and instead of choosing the Christians this time, He chose us. It's a very interesting spin-off. So that for the entire world, really, you'll have that all of the foundation of really any morality today in the world is because of the Exodus from Egypt, because there Hashem showed, hey, I'm God, I'm in control, here are my laws, and the entire world changed, because as we mentioned, I think 2 times ago, before the Jewish people, before the Torah came out to the world was a very dark and scary place, in the sense that there was no morals. What was normal in everyday society was human sacrifices, murder, robbery, torture was the standard. We mentioned the other time the Colosseum, the great Colosseum. If you go to Italy, you got to go to Rome. You go to Rome, you got to see the Colosseum. What's the Colosseum about? Anybody want to tell me what's the Colosseum? Gladiators. But no, it wasn't like gladiators sound like it was like good warriors. It wasn't gladiators like that. It was prisoners of war that they took. It was slaves that weren't behaving. It was a lot of Jews, unfortunately, that were taken from Israel during the Roman invasion. The place was like the biggest funeral home in the very sadistic manner that you can imagine. It was horrible, and this was Rome. Like America today is like, oh, the valleys are after the Rome and Greek. No, it was horrifying. As we mentioned the other time that there was, I forgot the name again. You want to remind me? Saturnalia. That during in the Roman Empire, you had 1 week, courts closed, no police officers, do whatever you want. Imagine. Whatever you want, everything goes. This was the norm in the world before the Torah came out to the world. When I say to the world, I mean to the non-Jews. When, interestingly enough, when Christianity and Islam started picking up, Torah values through that, interestingly enough, went out to the world and like, hey, yeah, we don't do human sacrifices anymore. We don't murder because life is valuable. We don't rob because it's not right. Torture is out. Today's world in any civilized country is because the Torah came out to the world. Because Torah values came out to the world. Till recently in India, when I say recently, I mean the past 70 years, until very recently, until like the 1950s or so, I'm wrong, but somewhere around there, if your husband died, you were expected to like jump into his fire, fire, where they burned his body. The wife was expected to go with him. And that was standard. When the British came in, who had values, Judeo-Christian values, came in like, what are you guys doing? What's wrong with you guys? Why are you burning so many women? They said, no more. And after that, I don't think they weren't able to force it anymore, but you would be looked down upon if you didn't do it. These types of practices were normal in the places of the world where Torah didn't touch. Native Americans, 200-300 years ago, Native Americans, there was a famous thing that if a husband died, I know it's all about husbands dying and wives suffering because of it, but if a husband died, the women had no property rights. 0 property rights. Which means if your husband dies, you know how they come, you said Shiva, and they come, they pay their condolences, and they take whatever they want from the house. Like nothing. You have nothing, you have no rights to property. There was a article I read where one of the women had to then go, because it was winter, she had to go and keep herself warm by the horses, because they have heat in their bodies, and she didn't make it that night. But that's the sick world, the sick place that the world was until the Torah values came out. So the fact that the concept of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Jewish people coming out of Egypt and now being a light onto the world, the fact that the entire Torah, the fact that it's true, comes from Yetziat Mitzrayim, you can see why it's so foundational. But and by the way, interestingly enough, Hitler, Machshmov Zechro, he hated, what did he hate more? So they discuss in history, what was Hitler's primary objective? What was his primary? Was it world domination or murdering all the Jews? So they have this discussion. So he, in Mein Kampf, he says that the Jews brought 2 blemishes into the world. One a blemish on the body, and the other blemish on the mind. The blemish on the body was circumcision. The blemish on the mind was a conscience. What he wanted to do, and you can see why what he wanted to do was, he said, then he says this outright, Jews brought a conscience into the world, concept of right and wrong. Let's get rid of it. That's why he wanted to get rid of Jews. He hated the fact, and he understood clearly, that all right and wrong morality in the Western world came from Jews. And he's like, I want it out. That was his primary objective. He hated Jews. I mean, this is clear, Amalek, for anyone who understands. This is clearly anti-God mindset. So that's one aspect, that the concept of the Exodus from Egypt, Yetziat Mitzrayim, what it brings, that Hashem comes and says, I'm in charge, here's the Torah, change, and not just change to the Jewish people, change to the world, stop these barbaric practices, get a little bit enlightened. But there's another interesting concept that the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, shows us. And we're going to get to the juicy stuff soon. But it shows us another thing. It shows us that, I'll ask you guys a question. The 10 plagues, the sea parting, the sea splitting, all amazing things. Everybody heard about it. The Torah makes a huge deal about it. But did you know that when the Jewish people were going to cross into the land of Israel, they had to pass the Jordan River. The Jordan River is a river. The Jordan River split. A river, and let me ask you a question. which one is more miraculous? Which one's more crazier? A sea splitting or a river splitting? Really? See? Everyone agrees? See? Sea splitting? Let me make the question a little clearer. A sea is still, not an ocean, but a sea is still, like, you know what I'm talking about? Seas, like it's like a big lake type of thing. It doesn't move. A river flows. So when you split a sea, okay, so the sea splits. A river, how do you split a river? Because it's flowing. To split a river, and the Ma'am laws and the Midrash bring this down, to split a river, you need to stop the flow on one side, the other side becomes empty because it goes down, and it begins to build up. So the Ma'am laws brings the Midrash, which says that when Yeshua, the Sefer Yeshua itself says, when Yeshua walked through it, the Jordan River stopped. They brought the Aron Kodesh there. It stopped and it started building up. So the river split. A little bit more miraculous than a sea splitting. It starts to build up. In fact, when the Canaanites saw it, they were like, "Oh my gosh!" They got really scared, rightfully so. When Yeshua walked, there was a city called Jericho. Everybody heard of Jericho? When it was surrounded by humongous walls. It was impenetrable. In order to get inside, Yeshua needed to, Hashem told him, walk around it for 7 days, each time one. Blow shofar, and the end, the last day, I believe, blow it, I think 7 times, the shofar, and the walls will collapse. Pretty big miracle, no? And the walls did collapse. Now, I can explain to you somewhat scientifically with the resonation of the sound. Very nice, but very, very miraculous. How come no one ever heard about it? How come we don't make a big deal about it? Another one, Yeshua stopped the sun, or the earth from revolving. He needed more time. He asked Hashem. Hashem said, no problem. Meaning more time in the day to finish a battle. Hashem stopped the sun for him. For a long time. Miraculous. No one ever heard about it. We heard about the 10 plagues. We don't hear about this. Another one. Anybody ever heard of Assyria? Well, Assyria was the nasty nation that decided to take 10 of the tribes of the Jewish people to captivity to the point where we don't know where they are now. They captured the 10 tribes, sent them off. They were like the biggest world power at that point. They captured the 10 tribes, and then they were coming for Yerushalayim, for Jerusalem. They surrounded Jerusalem. They had an army that the Torah says that you couldn't see the end of. Millions of people. Humongous army. Around the little city of Jerusalem. What happened? In fact, the king of Assyria was making fun of Hiskiah, who was the king of the Jews. He's saying, I'll provide the horses for you to fight with. You just provide the people to sit on the horses. Like, he was like mocking them. Overnight, it was actually Pesach night. Overnight, Hashem sent one angel, wiped out. Next morning, you saw the entire place, everyone dead. Millions of people. Anybody ever heard of this? No, not really. No, most people don't hear about it. Why not? Is there a small miracle? No. So the question I have is, why does the Torah make such a big deal about the Exodus from Egypt, and it doesn't make such a big deal about many other miracles that happened? And I think the answer is that in every other situation where we had a miracle like that, the people were righteous. They're more or less righteous. Yeshua, with the Jewish people at that point, Hiskiah in that generation, in every other situation, people were righteous. By the Exodus from Egypt, the Jewish people were at its lowest spiritual point ever. They were on the 49th level of impurity. They were, in fact, it was so bad when Hashem split the sea and he was about to close it on the Egyptians that the angels started protesting. They're like, whoa, we don't understand. Explain something. Elu ve'elu ovdei avodah zarah. Both these, the Egyptians that you want to kill now, and the Jews that you're saving, they're the same. They both serve idols. Why are you saving one and killing the other? Good question. The entire Exodus from Egypt, the Jews got miracle after miracle after miracle. They got the man, they got the be'er, the water. the 10 plagues, splitting of the sea, they deserved nothing. They didn't deserve any of it. And that's what makes Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, so foundational as well. Not only is foundational because it shows us Hashem runs the world, also shows us that when Hashem runs the world, you don't have to be a pure tzaddik in order to get goodness from Hashem. All you have to do is just have your, I don't want to say it the wrong way because then people will take it the wrong way. All you have to do is really want to be in a good place with Hashem. You have to want to be in a situation where you want to become better. That's all. You could be very far away. You could be on the lowest level of impurity, but all you have to do is want to become better, just a little better. No problem. You don't have to be a tzaddik. That's what the exodus from Egypt. That's why it's so, because I can't have a relationship with Hashem. I can't rely on Hashem. I can't have this relationship if I feel like dirt. If I know what I've been doing, then I'm not exactly the greatest tzaddik. But if all I have to do to rely on Hashem that He'll take care of me is just to want to be a little better, it's a different world. In fact, the Gemara says an amazing thing. It says, imagine you have the pasuk says, the verse says, King David says, Haboter ba Hashem chesed yosavenu. Someone who trusts and relies on Hashem, who puts his reliance on Hashem, you'll take care of me. Hashem surrounds him with kindness. The Gemara says, to the point where if you have somebody who's in the middle of a robbery, let's say in modern terms, he's in the middle of robbing a bank, a Jewish bank. He's robbing a Jewish bank in Israel. Imagine he's got loads and he's like, and all of a sudden he starts hearing sirens. And he knows he's got 15 seconds to get out of there. And he needs at least 2 minutes to get out. And he knows he's in a lot of trouble. The Gemara says if at that point he looks up and says, Hashem, I trust in you, and he really feels it. I'm trusting in you I'm relying on you that you'll take me out of this. You put yourself in that situation, you're stealing. He said, Hashem, I'm relying on you. I'm relying on you. I'm not a great guy right now, but I'm relying on you to take care of me. Hashem will take care of him. It's crazy. But that's exactly what we see from the Exodus from Egypt as well. You don't have to be a tzaddik. All you have to do is want to be in a better place. Just a little desire. So the question we have today really is, how do we know that the Exodus from Egypt, how can we see, one of the ways we can see that the Exodus from Egypt actually happened. How do we know the Jewish people actually left Egypt and the 10 plagues actually occurred? Good question? Great question, right? Like, how can we actually substantially more see? So I have something here tonight that I wanted to share. Feel free to take one and pass it down.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
You said that the Jews were in the lowest level of Tumah. That's something we all grew up learning. But then you also hear contradictory facts. The Jews kept their language, their clothing, their names. So that makes it a little bit better. When Moshe looked out, the Jews they had that brotherly connection. They had that Jewish, weren't they all kind of protecting each other? No?
In fact, when Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went, the whole situation Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away from Egypt was when he tried to save a
Jew.
He saved a Jew. He killed an Egyptian in a special way, and he put him under the ground. And then when he saw two Jews fighting, he's like, "Hey, why are you fighting?" He said, "Who are you? Are you gonna?" He's like, "I'm gonna report you to Paro," and he actually went and he reported him. And the funniest part is, he saved one of his relatives. And
all the Jews
so clearly they wanted. Well,
all the Jews were that low.
Not necessarily.
So, but you always hear like, I don't know. I feel like you hear they were really low, but then you also hear, but there were some. The Jews kept, like I said, their language, their clothing, their names.
One more thing, yeah. So if you think about it, you're right. So they kept three things.
And that was it.
That's what it sounds like. Not too much else. Meaning they like really kept but at the end of the day, no, they didn't even keep the bris. They kept very, very, very little when they were. By the time they were done with it, to the point where the angels were like, they both serve idols. There's no difference. So, don't take a look at this page just yet. Look at this page. So, what does this look like? I will tell you what it looks like.
Which one is the right way?
I have no clue because it's apparently ancient Egyptian. And what I thought ancient Egyptians wrote in hieroglyphics with the guy saying like this, but apparently not. They actually wrote in an interesting language which kind of resembles a certain type of Asian language. So this was actually called the Epir papyrus. The Epir papyrus was found early in the 19th century, and in Egypt, and it's currently in a museum in Holland under a lot of security. And it took them a while to actually be able to translate it. But once they didn't have the whole thing, because it was, again, imagine being under earth for 3,000 years, you're not going to exactly be in the best condition. I don't know how it came out as well as it did. But they dated it back to about 3,300 years ago, which is the time. There's actually two different opinions on it, but they dated it back to about 3,300 years ago, which is around the same time the Jews left Egypt. And it was translated by a guy by the last name of Gardiner in 1909, not a Jewish guy. And it talks about some very interesting things, which kind of shocked a lot of people when they saw it. So one of the things it mentions is, the whole thing is talking about like a really bad time for Egypt. And this person who was writing this, now remember, not everybody could write. The percentage of people that could write in Egypt at that point probably was 0.1%. And this person had to be very, very scholarly to write. And one of the things he writes is, plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. Interesting. The next thing he writes is, the river is blood. Now, pay attention. He's not saying that there's blood in the river. He's saying the river is blood. Men shrink from tasting it, human beings, and they thirst after water. I'm just reading this side right here. I apologize, I should have made that very clear. I'm reading this part right here because I'm not actually reading the whatever language that is. So just stick with me for now, don't go too far down. Then the first column on the left over there, he's saying, plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere, the river is blood. Now it's interesting, he's not saying like there's blood in the river, he's saying the river is blood. Men can't drink it. In order for a river to have, you understand, a river flows, right, like we said? So in order for there to be enough blood that you can't drink from it, you need a lot of blood. Because it'll just wash away. But no, it's not washing away to the point where people have nothing to drink, what he writes. That is our water, that is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. Again, he's not saying there's blood in the river, it's going to clear out by tonight. No, the river is blood. Next part. Go down. Another question. So, okay, blood, let's say whatever happened to the river, I got it, can't drink from the river. What about wells? If you live next to the rivers, you can just go to the river and get water. But if you live like a mile away, you're not going to go to the river every time. You're going to have a well or a cistern. You know what a cistern is? Back in the days, they used to have not cement, but similar type of thing. Like you dig a hole in the ground and you cover it with clay or something, some sort of material that won't let the water absorb. And when it rains, it goes in there and you can collect water in there. So you have a water supply if you don't have a well around. So my question is, what happened to the wells? What happened to the cisterns of water? What happened to it all? So clearly that's not working either, because people are really, really thirsty. You understand? Catch my drift? If you're living a mile, 2, 3 miles away from the river, your source of water is not going to be the river. It's going to be the well or the cistern or whatever else you have. So why is everyone so thirsty? So clearly the Torah says, all the water in Egypt turned into blood. So that's why they were so thirsty. They couldn't even have regular water from the well. Next part. So if you look down 6:3, if you can see it, grain has perished on every side. And the Torah says, the hail destroyed every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. And the flax and the barley was destroyed. That which was seen yesterday is now gone. Meaning, it sounds like there was a destruction of the grain in 2 steps. And exactly what happened. First came, I forgot which one came first, but first came the locust and destroyed it, and they had no more, like they literally had no grain. And to the point where he says, even 10:3, like right here, 10:3, says, Lower Egypt weeps. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belonged by right wheat, barley, geese, fish. They had nothing to eat, even in the palace, because all of the grains were destroyed, either by the locust or by the hail. Going down further, in the third column over here, 5:5, all animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. And the Torah says, and the hand of Hashem is upon the cattle which is in the field, and there was going to be a very grievous sickness, which means one of the plagues was the fact that all the animals got very sick. The next part, behold, cattle are left astray, and there's no one to gather them together. What's that talking about? Well, the Torah says, when the hail, before the hail came, Hashem said, Moshe told Paro, was like, hey, tell your people to bring inside everybody from the field, including your cows, because you're about to have a serious hailstorm. And the ones that didn't bring it inside, they're the ones who ended up, no one could bring them in because there was crazy hail coming through, and nobody could go out and grab the cattle and bring them in. So they were all dying in the field. This little column right here is one of my favorites. Well, actually, the last one's my favorite, but 9:11 says, the land is without light. Now, it's interesting. He's not saying it's cloudy, it's misty, there's some smoke happening, or whatever happened like last month, where you couldn't go outside normally. It's pollution. No, the land is without light. What does that mean? It's not how cloudy can it get. So the land, and I had my other question was, sir, I get it. Okay, let's say it's very, 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 very cloudy. I get it. So like this somehow. But what do people do at nights? Now we have lanterns and whatnot. Back then, what do? They had torches. So how's the land without light? Even at night, people walked around back then. So what does it mean the land is without light? There's no light anywhere. What does that mean? So the Torah says that they couldn't even get their candles to turn on. There was no light from torches, nothing. The land was literally without light. And I'll say that part. The next one, 4:3. The children of princes. Now, I'm not writing this way. This is the guy writing this. I couldn't make up this stuff so well. The children of princes are dashed against the walls. Now, clearly, they're dying. Next one. The children of princes are cast out in the streets. What's going on? Let's say they died naturally, right? Okay, so why are you throwing them outside? They're the children of princes at the end of the day. Why are their parents throwing them outside? So if you know, the Torah says that, the Medrash says that when, by the plague of the firstborn, it was anyone from the prince of Paro who's in the palace to the firstborn in the prison, when they died, they were scared, the Egyptians, that they were going to be, that whatever they're having, whatever their sickness they're dying from, is going to spread to them. So they were throwing them out the door. So he writes pretty clearly, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. The children of princes are cast out into the street. Next one. So you can flip it around now. 2, 3. He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. The Torah says there was no family that didn't have at least somebody die. It is a groaning throughout the land mingled with lamentations. And the last one, look at 3:2. Now this is my favorite. Gold, lapis lazuli, silver, malachite, carnelian, and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. Now, what's so interesting about that, besides that the women had a good time with all the jewelry, is that he didn't mention anywhere that slaves were revolting. Didn't sound like it. It sounded like there were some plagues. So why didn't the slaves all of a sudden have all of the jewelry? And all the good stuff too, not just jewelry. And the Torah says very clearly, before the Jews left, the Hashem told them, go and ask the Egyptians for their nice clothing, for their jewelry, and take it with you when you go out. And he's clearly writing that all the expensive stuff is on the neck of the female slaves. Why didn't we get this passed down in heirlooms? I don't know where it went. But I have no other way to explain, specifically that last line, that the slaves should have all of the jewelry. How did that happen all of a sudden? So you see from here a very interesting thing, that you have this Ippur papyrus, which was dated to about 3,300 years ago, that discusses what seems like almost word for word the plagues in Egypt, and not just the plagues, but the last part, which is the best kicker, which is that the slaves came out with all the jewelry. So how we know whether or not the Exodus happened, the Jewish people came out of Egypt, we could know that in a different way as well. This is a phenomenal way that looks like it, but we can know that much more simpler actually. Because if the Exodus happened about 3,300 years ago, imagine you're sitting at your Pesach Seder when you were 8 years old, and your grandfather or whoever else is around, let's say, 78. Good difference, right? So you have an 8-year-old kid and a 78-year-old grandfather telling over the story from Egypt. How many of those do you need in order to go back to the original Pesach Seder? A lot? Really? Think about it. Imagine you have an 8-year-old sitting by the 78-year-old grandfather listening to the story while we came out of Egypt. Imagine that 78-year-old grandfather being an 8-year-old himself, listening to his 78-year-old grandfather. And that grandfather being 8 years old and listening to his 78-year-old grandfather. So how many of those would you need to get to the original Pesach Seder in Egypt right before they came out? Someone do some quick mathematics.
Less than 50.
Less than 50. About 45 Pesach Seders between us and the original one. So it's a very simple way we can know it happened, because our grandparents told us, and their grandparents told them, going 45 times back. But this is actually not too bad either. Questions? First about this. Any questions? Was it really that good? There's no questions? Nothing. Okay, yeah, Pashal. Any other questions besides this? That we said there'll be a Q&A that's open to the floor to any questions. You can actually pass them up and I'll take a look. I don't know if I'll be able to get to all of them. You can start passing them up, actually. I'll start reading them to see what's... don't be offended if I don't choose yours. All right. Okay, so two of them, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not going to answer. Nothing to do with...
I want you to answer.
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Not that I can't answer it, but I'd rather a female answer them. And if you want, my wife would be... You might be comfortable. I'm not comfortable. There's like 25 of you who want to meet like so if you want, my wife actually deals with this very well, both of these questions. And the questions are, when dating, do you have any tips on how to maintain shomer negia? And what are major red flags you should avoid when dating? My wife deals with this consistently with her students at Emet, so feel free to, if you want, I can tell her to come by next time. Next question, the other question, which I'm nothing personal. No, this one is just, my wife is better to answer. How do we go about raising kids to avoid disconnecting with Torah and mitzvos? Well, that I can answer that, but now we know who answers that question. Okay, how do we go about raising kids to avoid disconnection with Torah and mitzvos? I'll let my wife answer that question. And how do we handle this generation's pressure of keeping kosher, dressing, etc. for children? Let my wife answer that one. But I'll give you a very simple tip. You can't. It has to be real, which means that if you want your kids to go in the path of Torah, it can't. You need two things. A, you have to have it in the home. Like they have to actually. The kids can read right away if you're real around about something. You know, if they never hear you talking about Hashem, and they never hear you talking about your own life situations where you had trust in Hashem, or like you had a salvation, or you had whatever, so then they're not gonna. It's all like intellectual, but nothing's gonna fall into the heart. They have to hear it from their parents, and it can't be like drilled into them. It has to be like they hear it coming from you, like, oh, they're like listening in, like, oh wow, or like over the Shabbat table. You know, I try to tell my kids a lot of stories about myself where I saw hashgacha pratit, which means like divine intervention in my life. And they love it. Like every Shabbat, my kids to this point already, it's like, we want more stories. We want more stories. I'm just like, I wish I would have written everything down in my life. I have the diary from day to day. But so that type of thing where you're talking about your own life and like, hey, I have this story, and for that reason you have to start writing things down when they happen so you remember them. That's one. Two, I find that if bringing them to lectures where, as they get older in their high school years, where they actually see that, that how you can actually intellectually prove that the Torah is from God, it's an extreme must. Because if you don't have that, everything else is very shaky. Especially nowadays when there's so much pressure. It's insane. I tell my kids are not like, they're not like, they don't have their own smartphones. There's a smartphone which is called the home phone, which my wife and I, only us, have the password to. And when they want to use it for whatever type of purpose, looking up a recipe, whatever, like they're within our proximity. They can't just use their own phones. Because I had somebody that I look up to very much told me that one of the biggest mistakes they made in their life was giving their kids smartphones when they just came out. So they didn't realize how dangerous it actually was. Luckily, I realized, because there was a little bit more time I had. So keeping them away from that type of stuff they'll be very. My kids are not happy. We're not happy for a long time that we don't give them any smartphones. We didn't go cold turkey on them. There is a phone that they could use, and they can even make phone calls that they want. They have emergency contacts, which is like 50 contacts of like all their friends and that they can just press on and scroll down and pick. But giving them access to these types of devices by themselves, you're just asking for trouble, like serious trouble. So I always tell my kids, my students, I feel so much more luckier than you. I didn't have all this garbage in my life when I was your age. So keeping the pressure as far as everything and all the negative influences from the world, just try to limit their connection to the connection, to internet connection, and bring them to lectures where they actually, I'm not the only one in the world that can do this. There's plenty of lectures online they can listen to as they get older, and in your own life. Here, I got. You want your kids to stay religious? Make them like you. No, seriously. Make them like you to the point where they're getting from you their feeling of happiness. Meaning they enjoy talking with you such that they know that let's say there's a temptation of some sorts. They know though, if I do this, my father, my mother did not necessarily yell at me, hopefully not, but that I'm going to mess up my connection with them. And it means a lot to me, just selfishly, because they get a lot of enjoyment from that connection. So you make yourself somebody that they like. How do you do that? Pick your battles, which means, there's been so much change in the past 100 years. It boggles the mind. The way my grandparents parented my parents' generation, not my personal grandparents, that generation to the next generation, was very different than the way my parents' generation would parent my generation, and which is very different the way my generation should parent their kids. There's just so much change because, in my generation, my parents could tell me, hey, you're doing this, this, and this wrong, shape up. And I'd be like, yes, sir. Done. The next generation, my kids, if not just my kids, any kids, you put too much pressure on them, you'll destroy your relationship with them. They're just much weaker. The generation is just getting... So pick your battles about what you want, what you want them to... How you parent them, because if you put too much, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, they're not going to like you. So just keep that in mind. Pick your battles very wisely. How did you reach 45 generations from that? That's a simple one, right? So basically it's going from 8-year-old kid to 78-year-old grandfather, right? And then that 78-year-old grandfather, when he was 8, his 78-year-old grandfather was telling him the story. So that's basically a difference of 70 years. So
you can just divide.
And just divide 3,300 by 70, you get to about 45.
It's not that often when you find a grandfather that's 70 years, 70 years older than his 8-year-old grandchild.
I thought it was.
Yeah.
How old would the grandfather be?
It's like a very big age gap for 2 generations.
No, because you understand. So the grandfather, imagine the grandfather, he had a couple of kids. His last kid, let's say, was when he was 35, right? Mm-hmm. And then that kid had another kid who was when he was 35. So that's a 70-year gap. So you're not just talking about the first ones. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Okay, how do you keep inspiration going?
Wait, that's right, next interrupt. Can we just go back to that smartphone thing for a second?
Sure.
I mean, since we're always saying that smartphones are so bad and all that, what's a good...
Smartphones are not bad. I use them very well. You just have to be able to use them very well. Like everything else, it's like a knife. You have to be careful. You don't give kids...
They're using it now as their outlet to what are they supposed to be doing in their free time? Teenagers, They always have their...
You got to keep them in school till 10 p.m. I'm just...
They're studying, they're working, they're doing their responsibilities. So when they have a few minutes of free time, what can they do?
Can I ask you a question? What did you do?
What do you do?
We went outside. It was
television.
So guess what happens?
I put on television. We had that.
Okay, I hear. So you know what happens? You know what happens? You know what happens? I also wonder, what are my kids going to do? The way I was as a kid? I watch 3 hours of television on any weeknight, like just meaning on a school night. I would watch at least 3 hours of television and play on the computer. I do not recommend that recipe for anybody. It's called. I wonder how much smarter I would have been had I not done that, and how much time I actually killed with that, and garbage I put into my system. But I wondered, what are my kids going to do that they don't have that, right? So guess what? They figure it out. You get them toys. You get them. They'll find.
Okay, I'm talking about like teenagers.
Can I ask a question?
There's currently one in session.
Yes, her.
Okay.
Why do you want to limit your teenager's phone access? How old are they? Yeah, I'm just curious. Like,
Teenagers.
how old? Like
Let's say 16, 17, 15.
I'm just curious. Why do you feel concerned to limit their phone access?
Because they can see a lot of garbage.
Like, you could see a lot. In my opinion, you could see a lot of garbage walking outside.
Yeah, but the problem is that's when.
I want to bring
No, but I would.
All right, we're gonna move on to the next question. How do you keep inspiration going? As the
Conversation. Like, I'm just curious. Like, why is your 16-year-old feel like that?
Because at that age, I have a 6-year-old boy, nothing is, and I think boys maybe more than girls, my girl's not 16 yet, nothing is stopping them from doing something. I feel like I would have stopped myself as a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
I don't think a boy will stop himself from saying things he shouldn't be saying.
Can I tell you, my 18 and 20-year-old, they don't want these phones, my 16-year-old.
They don't want it.
They're not interested in this phone.
Good.
So that's not their outlet. I mean, I
But do you feel like,
but they're good.
again,
okay, ladies, I'm sorry. I've got to go at some point, so you can cap this conversation afterwards. No problem. What do you want them to do? They will again. If
What's your outlook for a teenager boy? Like, tell me that.
meaning after he comes home from school, what should he be doing? Sports is a good idea. My kids also a lot of times they
Probably younger.
Tutoring other boys too.
yeah, my kids are younger. My oldest is 13, but they have they read a lot of books. Like,
There's nothing kosher to read for a teenage boy.
what are you talking
It's
about?
like a learning thing, which they don't want to learn anymore.
My daughter, she's 13 years old. She reads 400-page books in like 2 days.
Like a good kosher book.
Yeah, like suspenseful, scary. Like I would look at them like, oh my gosh, my heart. I'm like, sometimes I would look at this book and like, I'm too captivated to stop. I just keep going. I'm like, this is just wasting too much time. Yeah, there's plenty of books. I can try to. I mean, usually in schools they have Jewish libraries.
There's nothing interesting that's interesting for a teenage boy. It's all like either learning Halakha's history, biography.
Okay, can I don't have your number, but I have Ms. Melchan's number. I'll take a picture of a book. Like my daughter, I don't know where she gets stacks and stacks of books from.
There's Jewish libraries and the freshman meadows.
There's plenty of Jewish, there are Jewish libraries, and then you can also buy books. Again, my daughter, literally a 400-page book, 2 days.
That's it.
Okay. Go to a Jewish library. And my daughter gets these books from school. Yeah, they just get books. Okay. So you have to find something. But it's like, oh, what are they going to eat? Let me serve them cyanide. Like, no. Did you hear that point? It's like, what should they eat? I don't know. Let me give them some garbage and stuff. Like, no. Figure it out. Don't go for the easy way out, is what I'm saying. Okay. How do we keep the inspiration going? And I have my own separate question. How do you stop women from talking? That's what I get for that. Okay. How do we keep the inspiration going? Sometimes you don't. Meaning inspiration is an amazing, wonderful thing. It's extremely pleasurable and useful. The very good analogy would be like this. Whenever there's inspiration for anything you get it for a purpose, and then it goes away. Imagine, give me a situation, inspiration. Oh, here we go. It's only going to work for half of you. Okay, I'll do it anyway. Okay, imagine when some of you guys met your husbands, right? Right? I'm hitting a good point. Yeah. So imagine you guys met your husbands. When you met your husbands, you were like, wow, I hope. You were like totally enamored, like wow, there was like this incredible, what do you call that, infatuation, and there was like, fireworks going off, like wow, this is such an amazing person, incredible. That's called the inspirational stage, right? Like with anything else, right? That inspirational stage is going to die. Just give it time, it will die out. It might feel like, oh, this is going to last forever. It's once you think that, that's usually when it starts to die. That inspirational stage is there in a relationship to allow the next step of the relationship. So when you actually get married to that person, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. Just wait, right? You get married to that person, and then the inspiration starts to die down. At that point, what you're supposed to do is start the hard work on the actual relationship in order not to get the inspiration back alive. And this is the problem of America today, is that in relationships, all they're looking for is just that inspirational stage of like that first infatuation. Once that's gone, they just move on. That's why in Hollywood you have like 10 people going on their 20th marriage. Once that's gone, they just move on because everyone's looking for that inspirational, that stage of inspiration. What you're supposed to do is after that inspiration wears off, you're supposed to remind yourself how good it was and build it back up in order for it to become as good as it originally was. But now when you actually, meaning that inspiration was given to free, it was for free, you just got it. But after you work on the relationship, that inspiration or that work will turn it not back into the inspiration, but something much better. It'll actually become real love. When you just met them, there wasn't real love. It was infatuation. And you want me to prove it? Simple. Imagine you're dating somebody and you're totally infatuated with them. Imagine they pass away, God forbid. You're going to be very sad. For how long? 6 months? A year? Imagine, God forbid, you're in a relationship, you're married, you're happily married, you're already in love with you reach the point after working tremendously on the relationship with your husband, God forbid he passes away. How long are you going to be sad for? Much longer. Why? Because the love that's built through work after the inspiration is worth a lot more than the inspiration. It might feel much better in the inspirational stage, but there's not much to it. For men, I would give the analogy of when you make a barbecue, make shashlik, you've probably seen your husbands do this. You have coal, so you put on lighter fluid or whatever, and you light it up, and you have that initial fire, right? So that's akin to, this is Rabbi Akiva Tatz's actual analogy, that's akin to the first inspirational stage. It's beautiful, it's amazing, wow. And then it dies down. Can you cook anything on that fire, by the way? No, that's just going to do nothing or burn. You can put your hand through that fire, by the way. After it dies down a bit, you start working and you start fanning it. Or if husband's smart, he takes a fan and plugs it in and goes, right? Or you start fanning it with something. That's the work. That's the work. What happens after you do that for long enough? A fire builds up inside. Is it as glamorous as the original fire? No. Can you cook something on it? Yeah, that's the real fire. Can you put your hand, forget through it, can you put your hand near it? It'll burn your hand. That's when it's really hot. That's when it's real fire. The initial thing is not fire. I don't know what it is, but it's nice. You can put your hand through it, it's beautiful. But that's the inspirational. The inspiration is meant for you to do the work then to get to what it's supposed to be. Next question. Thank you. Why does Hashem always help people when they want it? Meaning, in contrast to our bank robber, Hashem helped. The Gemara says Hashem will help him even if he's somebody who doesn't deserve it and in the middle of a bank heist. So how come? I think the question is, how come Hashem just doesn't help me when I need it, right? And the answer is that when the Gemara says that the bank robber is there and he's going like, Hashem, only you can help me at this point, he really means it. Meaning it's not lip service. There's much depth to the human being. The first level is his lips. You could be saying something all day and not really feel it. In order to get that level of help from Hashem, you need to actually feel that. You need to actually feel what you're saying, which is feeling, Hashem, only you can help me. When you say that with your lips, it's nice, but it's just lip service. When you actually feel it, it's called dat. Dat means, Rabbi Kiva Tatz also talks about this, I learned from it means experiential knowledge. Feeling what you intellectually understand. An example. He gives us an example also. Imagine you have a wonderful Jesus example. You have a kid who comes up to a hot plate, and you parents tell him, it's hot, don't touch it, don't touch it. 2 kids. One kid goes, yes, it's hot, it's hot, it's hot. I'm not going to touch it, I'm not going to touch it, it's hot, it's hot. Okay, and stays away from it. The other kid, it's hot, and he touches it. Oof, burns. The first kid is smarter, he didn't touch it, right? So they both come, now the third kid comes. Both of them start screaming, it's hot, it's hot. Which kid understands it better? Which kid feels it? The second kid who burned himself. That's called dat. That's called experiential knowledge. Feeling what you know intellectually. The first kid, he could be saying it's hot, it's lip service. He doesn't really feel it. He just knows, oh, it's hot. But the second kid, he feels it. When you say, Hashem, help me, only you can take me out of this, it can either be lip service or it can be real, deep down. When it comes to when you really feel, Hashem, I've seen you in the past, only you can help me, and you actually mean it, then I can't imagine Hashem is not going to help you at that point. Because Hashem wants us to change ourselves and to grow close to Him, not just for the lip service aspect of it. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.